I love therapy, and in fact, I've been going to therapy since I was around 6 years old. Though I talk about therapy a lot and may interview some therapists on the show on occasion, nothing that is said in this podcast should be considered a replacement for therapy. If you are struggling, I urge you to please seek guidance from a therapist because you are absolutely worth it. Hello everyone, you are listening to Wine, Dine, and 69, a podcast about dating, relationships, sex, and self-love. I am your host, Rachel Dalton, and I am cozy as fuck in front of my fireplace. It's been a very rainy, cold day here in Philly, and I've been running around doing errands all day, just very, very cold, and I am very pleased to be ending the day podcasting in front of my fireplace. I hope that everyone's doing well and taking care of themselves. I know that this time of year, even though it's supposed to be very relaxing and chill, it has turned out, I feel like it's so stressful for so many people. But I guess that's capitalism for you. So everything that I'm going to talk about in this intro kind of is related to the interview, which is about recovering from betrayal, the beauty after betrayal. I talked today with Jenni Rochelle, who went through her own major betrayal in the past and has decided to help other women who have experienced similar things take back their life after betrayal. And what do those steps look like? Because if you're betrayed, you have no control over the situation. Your life is completely destabilized through no fault of your own, but it is your job after that to get grounded again, even though it wasn't your fault to begin with. And yeah, life is so unfair in that way. But anyway, it kind of, because the steps that you have to take are so important when recovering from betrayal, it got me thinking about progress and kind of progress in terms of my own life. Like, you know, people know that the last couple of years were difficult for me. I mean, they were difficult for everyone, pandemic, and everything that went along with that. But, you know, in addition to that, I lost a lot of people in my life, over that time period, and that's difficult for someone like me who puts so much into my friendships, my relationships. But it's funny to look back at where I was, you know, a year and a half ago, where I literally didn't think I was going to make it. And then to look at where I am now. You know, I am in a show. I don't know if I've mentioned that. I got a promotion a couple of weeks ago. You know, I'm so happy with the people in my life, my family, my friends. I have a wonderful support system that I trust with my life, 100%. And it's been a long time since I felt that secure in my support system. And as you'll hear me mention in the interview, I am seeing someone new. I have somebody new in my life, and have for some time now. But I guess this is a new step in the relationship or whatever to mention it on the show. So yes, but it's going really well. So well sometimes that I am suspicious. But I'm trying to just go with the flow and allow myself to be happy, because I am. So that's what it is, though, right? Like, you look at where you came from and you look at where you are, and point A to point B isn't so simple. There are so many steps that it took in between those 2 points to get to where you are now. And I guess that's what made me think about the interview in the context of betrayal and in the context of progress. All of the different things that you do, there's taking action points like, in career or, like for me, like auditioning for shows. But then there's also the emotional progress that you have to be very intentional with. And that includes, going to therapy. It includes journaling. It includes having a spiritual practice, whatever it means for you. That's hard work. And I think of the quote by my favorite author, Cheryl Strayed, where she says, all of those useless days will add up to something. I've been thinking about that a lot. It's been ringing in my head this week because I'm just starting to feel it for the first time. It feels like all of the days over the past year and a half where I just felt like I was, swimming or coasting or some days just surviving. It added up, and you don't even realize it when you're going through it, but it does. And so, for anybody out there going through a hard time, whether it be betrayal or whatever, like, I know it's cliche to say keep going, but keep going and keep fighting, because at the end of it, you look back and you're just like, oh, holy shit, like I didn't even realize I was working so hard. But time and effort heal all wounds, I suppose. And that kind of brings me to this article that I actually read over the summer, but that I revisited recently. I found it again. It is from The Atlantic, and it is from the How to Build a Life column by Arthur C. Brooks, which I really, really love. And it's called How to Make the Baggage of Your Past Easier to Carry. And, I thought that in the context of betrayal, that this was kind of a relevant article to discuss. But it also kind of has to do with progress. These are steps that you can take to create that progress, right? So let's see here. There are 3 main points. One is keep a database of positive memories. Bad memories lead to bad feelings. Good memories lead to good feelings. And so if you have a bank of happy memories in your head that you can revisit, it kind of is the same thing as, gratitude. If you have the things that you are grateful for and you are bringing attention to them, then you're going to notice other things that make you feel gratitude. And that's actually the second point, is to focus on gratitude and to specifically have a journal practice about gratitude. And it's something that you have to train yourself into. I know that back at the beginning of, it was actually towards the, it was midway through 2021, I started a gratitude practice. And, I hate to admit it, but it really did make a difference. So, maybe that's something I'll start back up, is make Sunday my gratitude practice day. That's what I did for about 6 months back in 2021. And then step 3 is look for meaning in learning. So, that saying that's like, those who do not examine the past are doomed to repeat it. It's one thing to just like have your experiences and go through life, living those experiences, which one should, but to not look back, to not reflect, to not be introspective, that's a really big value that I learned that is important to me, is introspection. And so being able to look at the bad things that happen, the bad memories, and figure out what you can learn from them. And actually, a friend and I were just talking about this yesterday. And here's a journaling exercise. I'm actually going to read this verbatim. In your journal, reserve a section for painful experiences, writing them down right afterward. Leave 2 lines below each entry. After 1 month, return to the journal and write in the first blank line what you learned from that bad experience in the intervening period. After 6 months, fill in the second line with the positives that ultimately came from it. You'll be amazed at how this exercise changes your perspective on your past. And gosh, I think about it, if I I mean, I don't even need a journal about it. I think about, everything a year ago that I thought that I knew, or I thought that I understood, or I thought that I wanted, and then I look at where I was 6 months after the fact, and I look at where I am now, and I'm just like, holy shit, like, we're always growing and ever evolving. Okay, yeah, so I wanted to share that article. I will link it in the episode notes as always. And I wanted to kind of share my thoughts on progress. And, I don't know, my dark night of the soul, it feels like, I'm starting to reap some rewards, which feels really, really good. I feel like I've learned a lot. It's funny how like we learn the most from the really, really bad things, right? But I feel like I learned a lot. I'm saying this as if like my growth is over. It sure as hell is not. But yes, I feel like I have learned a lot about myself and about what I value and about the people around me, about what I want. And I have more self-confidence than I think I ever have, which is pretty fucking cool. So, with that, we're going to jump into talking about betrayal. We're going to jump into talking about how you can reclaim your life after a betrayal, and how you can take control and be happy again, because being betrayed sucks so much. But that doesn't mean that your life is over. In fact, it can be the beginning of a beautiful new chapter or whatever. So with that, I'm going to cut to a quick commercial break, and then please enjoy my conversation with Jenni Rochelle. So CBD is great, right? Sex is great, right? Okay, so what happens when you put the two of them together? What you get is a honeypot CBD infused personal lubricant. Created by a couple who is wonderfully in love, Dennis and Jesse, Honeypot is the perfect lube to level up your sex life. They also have an intimate romantic massage oil to get you revved up and started called Romantic Escapades. You're definitely going to want to try these products. This wonderful couple put a ton of work into them. And if you want to learn more about them and their story, you can go ahead and visit that episode. Episode 59. Wouldn't it be great if it were 69? It really would have been. Oh, well. Anyway, give Honeypot a try, give Romantic Escapades a try, and let me know what you think. You can go and learn more about them at fantasticescapades.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hope everybody enjoyed that little break. I am super excited to introduce my guest for this week, Jenni Rochelle. Jenni, how are you doing today?
I am so excited to be here and speak with you, Rachel.
I am super excited to talk to you about this subject, which we were saying before I record that I love how my podcast guests occasionally mirror kind of what I want to know about, what's going on in my personal life. So let's talk about it. We are going to be talking about betrayal and recovering from betrayal. Before we get started into the nitty gritty though, how about you tell my listeners a little bit about you and your story, how you got started and how you came to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like many people who end up in some sort of helping healing profession, they are led there not necessarily by their own choice. So
right.
I'm definitely no exception to that. Always been a helper, a healer, been a life coach off and on for going on a decade now. But back in 2000 and I always have to be really carefully because the trauma brain likes to erase the memories from my mind.
Right.
But in 2012, I had what we call in sort of the work that I do, I'm a betrayal trauma specialist. I had what we call a D-Day or a discovery day. And that was when my ex-husband at the time, he's my husband now, he's my ex-husband now. He got arrested.
Mm.
And he got arrested for something that I never divulged publicly, but it did involve him betraying me. And I eventually, after, about 2.5 years of denial and trying to figure out what's going on, I realized that he was a sex addict and that it had this whole double life that I had no idea
Oh
about.
my gosh.
And I'm sure some of this will come out in the show, but like, just want to legitimize my own experience as well as anyone else's experience who's had a betrayal happen to them, whether it's sex addiction or, I'm doing air quotes, just an infidelity or just porn. Like, it's real. It's a traumatic experience that happens to us. And so I spent several years trying to figure out what happened. How do I get better? Do I stay? Do I go? Is he going to get better? Right? What do I do with my kids? We have
Oh my
this whole life
gosh.
together, like trying to figure it out. And this was, 2012, so 10 years ago. And the whole like field of betrayal trauma and in sex addiction has come a long way. But back then there was really nobody who was really helping the partners of the sex addicts, the women or men who had been betrayed. And we were treated like we were codependent or even labeled as co-addicts, and that we were somehow enabling and involved or addicted to the addict.
That's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
We know now that actually we have PTSD, right?
Right, right.
Right, exactly. So
You're victims as well. You're victims of the
absolutely,
betrayer. Yeah.
exactly, 100%. And so through that process, I realized that that was going to be the focus of my own coaching business, was to work with women. I only work with women who are healing from betrayal trauma. Most of my clients have discovered that they were married or in a relationship to a sex addict, but not exclusively. There's not always a diagnosis of that. So it could also, it's just women who are healing from betrayal.
Sure. It could be like somebody cheated on them or, had a affair, different life, or like a gambling. I'm thinking of like different ways that somebody could be betrayed.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
and so we can define betrayal trauma, right? Is when a person or institution that we rely on for safety and security betrays our trust. So it's pretty broad. So yes, gambling, financial betrayal, infidelity, porn addiction, and we can even have like coworkers or friends, right, can betray our trust in the same way. And it's very traumatic and hurtful.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you can be betrayed by almost anyone. And I think that when that happens, your entire world crumbles around you because everything that you thought that you knew has changed in that one moment.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay, so you had this betrayal. What did that process? So you said that you had done life coaching on and off a little bit. You did that prior to the betrayal, and then you just kind of decided that you wanted to include that. How did kind of like starting this niche business kind of start? What did that process look like?
Yeah, so like I said, I had been sort of life coaching on and off, had been doing it in conjunction with a corporate career for a number of years, and had never really found, right, like what was my niche? What was the thing that I was really going to focus on? And then I was like, oh,
Look at
okay,
that.
look, this is what I'm going to do, right? Okay, this is what I'm going to focus
Exactly.
on. And, so I really did. I hit pause in the coaching business for several years while I was going through this terrible divorce, right? And focusing on myself and focusing on healing and, becoming the love of my own life. And just, kind of recovering from all of that. And then it was funny. Then it was 2018. I was ready because it took a few years to get through the process, to file for divorce, for the divorce to go through. I went back to my ex a number of times, which is also very typical.
That
Trying to get
happens.
out of it. It happens.
Happens in abusive relationships, which,
Absolutely.
is tangential. I mean, would you say that it's related?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, here's the thing. When there's any sort of, with sex addiction, or if there's ongoing infidelity, affairs, deception, that's absolutely some emotional abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have to lie, they have to gaslight, right? I know that word gets thrown around a lot these days, but it is when we try to alter someone's perception of reality. To maintain a double life, you have to lie, you have to gaslight. That is emotional abuse.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That is an insane story. So what I guess, like, what was the thing that eventually you were able to walk away?
It was realizing, it was multiple moments, honestly. There's some statistic about how many times it takes a woman to leave an abusive relationship. I've seen 5, I've seen 7, and it just takes as many times. And it was finally realizing, that I deserved better. There was so much fear that I had, and I hear this a lot from clients, and I know it resonates with so many women. Is this it? Is this all? Am I choosing to be alone? What if I can't find anybody else, right? At least I know this devil. What if I can't figure out a new devil? Like, am I too
Right.
old, right? You really go into this sort of scarcity mentality. So for me, choosing to believe that, like, okay, if I really want to have love in my life, that my choosing to end this relationship doesn't mean I'm giving up on it. I had to believe there was more love for me, right?
Yes.
That there's
Yes.
always more love for me. And then realizing too, I think this is tricky, is that, like, choosing to leave was choosing to commit to myself and having to do that
Mm,
every day. Because it wasn't like I didn't still have feelings for him. It wasn't like I didn't miss him. And sometimes we can look at that and think, it's like, oh, well, maybe I did the wrong thing. Maybe I should go back. No, that's not how
right.
it works. You have to remember why you deserve more.
You can love someone and love them from afar, knowing that they're not good for you.
Absolutely. 100%.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess, what do you say to people who, this is how this is how I am, right? So I'm one of those people who is just like, but it's about the principle of the thing. And for me, I'm just like, I just wish I could have some accountability. I wish that I could have an apology. Why can't I would apologize whenever I've done something wrong or I've hurt somebody, even if it was unintentional. I want them to know that I'm sorry. But as we know, or maybe we don't know, I mean, it's taken me a long time to learn this, but true closure comes from within. You can't get that externally from another person. So how do you talk to people about letting go of that need for accountability, or letting go of that need for an apology?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. Like, two of the toughest conversations that I have with the women that I work with are that one around, I like to boil it down to, there's no justice, right? And it's a very
Right.
cynical place to be, but it's really hard to get the justice, or to feel like that you get, like, an apology can make it better. If there's some sort of reparations or some sort of accountability that's going to make you actually feel better. And in the end, we really just have to get to the point where they're never going to apologize. They're never going to understand what they did. Mostly not. I mean, there definitely can be sex addicts or people who betrayed, who do the work and spend years in therapy and can learn to build empathy and understand what they did. But for the most part, they can't really understand what they did. And so learning to accept that and learning to make peace with it yourself, and to try to see, I don't say that everything happens for a reason, but how can I move on, and how can I believe that I'm creating this better life in spite of or because of what I went through?
Right. Right. And it's, I mean, they say what doesn't kill you make you stronger. And I love, I hate that, right? I hate
Right.
that phrase, but I also love it. And I see it's a cliche for a reason, right? Like,
Right.
okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you just kind of have to take it on and understand that it's not, it might not ever come. Yeah.
It might not come in the way that you want, right? It might
Right.
not. Yeah. And the other thing that I hate to talk about with clients, just to tie a bow on that, is that, trauma is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yes, it is.
So, like, they're like, when do I get better? When do I feel better? And I'm like, I'll let you know when I get there. I mean, I definitely feel better, but do I still get triggered? Yes. Does it not grab a hold of my nervous system in the way that it did 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago? 100%. But do I still, like, drive by the place where my ex got arrested and think about it? Of course I do. So
Yeah.
those are the two hard conversations: justice and, like, learning to care for your nervous system is your full-time job.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you're never over something like that, right? And if you are,
Yeah.
then you're probably just repressing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what are your thoughts on closure then? Like, understanding that apologies might never come and that you're going to be revisiting some of these triggers and these feelings over and over again. what does that look like? How do you talk to people about trying to obtain that?
It honestly, you need a lot of support. I had so much support in the early days. I had 2 coaches, I had 2 therapists, I had yoga teachers, I had a women's group. So to be able to tell your story, that's a huge part of the healing process. You need people to witness and tell the story. But again, it really is, how can you make peace with what happened to you? Maybe you can't ever, right? And it really is, it's a real struggle. And learning, like I said, how to care for your nervous system, know when you're being triggered, know when your body's having a reaction to it, which is also critical, when you start looking at that future relationship piece of it, is how to care for yourself. But closure is tricky. It's tricky, right? Sometimes, there are examples. I've had clients where, like, the betrayer, they do the work, they go through and what's called a disclosure, where they disclose, it's a therapeutic process where they disclose everything that happened within the course of the relationship. I know. It's brutal. It
sounds like a hard day.
It's a hard day. Yeah, it's a hard day. We do that so that, because one, that sense of uncertainty and not knowing can be really hard to live with. Some clients are like, I don't need to know. I don't want to know. But if you're going to choose to stay in the relationship, it's highly recommended, because you need to know what you're choosing to stay with.
Yes.
Because some of these behaviors could be, health risks, financial risks, whatever kinds of personal risks. So you need to know what you're choosing to sign up for.
Definitely. Okay. Well, that makes sense that's one of the major steps. And I mean, I guess that was kind of one of my next questions, is what are these steps? Can you kind of, do you kind of have a template that you follow with everybody? What does that process look like overall?
I do. And, the work that I do with clients, it's deeply rooted in, I've been trained by the Associations of Partners of Sex Addiction, Sex Addict Trauma Specialists, or APSATs. And the work that they do, they develop something called a multi-dimensional partner trauma model, which is, I'm going to make a lot of citations here because it's giving
no, I love
credit.
It. Yes.
It's very important to me.
Yes.
That's rooted in the work of a woman named Judith Herman, who wrote a book called Trauma and Recovery. And she talks about the process for recovering from all kinds of trauma. So not just betrayal trauma, but she breaks it down into 3 phases. And phase 1 is safety and security. First thing you got to do is have safety in your life. To do any sort of healing or moving on, we have to feel like we're safe. So it's really hard, to get any sort of healing when you're still in the relationship where there's active addiction or active betrayal. And this is one of the foundations of any successful therapist session as well, is you have to feel safe. You have to know the things are not going on in the relationship still, because you can't heal if you're not safe. So safety, boundaries. Doesn't mean you got to kick them out, but what do you need to feel safe in the, in the meantime?
Absolutely. Okay.
Second phase is called remembrance and mourning. And this is where you have some safety and stability in your life, and you can start to remember what happened to you. This is where you can start to do some of the family of origin work to sort of figure out, not that you chose this in any way, and I hate the word codependent, but looking back at sort of like, what happened to me? Because I believe that we end up in these relationships from unhealed, unprocessed trauma. So what do we need to look at there? Also, this is where we can start to get some perspective on what happened to us. And like I talk about it, we claim your comeback moment or your comeback story. It's where we start to shift from, oh, this terrible thing happened to me, which it did, but how do I become the hero, the heroine of my own journey, and start to see it from that perspective, zooming out from like this one chapter to focus on, okay, this terrible thing doesn't have to define me for the rest of my life. Third phase is called reconnection. And this is like beginning with reconnecting with ourselves, being the love of our own life, and then reconnecting with others. Often, especially in sex addiction where there's extreme betrayal, it's so isolating. There's so much shame that happens. And when any sort of relationship ends, it can be super isolating. We lose friends in that process. So learning to reconnect with self, with others. And this is where, and I talk about phase 3 or 3+, which is like when women start dating, right? Dating dating and having sex again after all that, right? Like, how do I navigate? This person lied to me and I felt unsafe. How do I trust anybody again? How do I trust me again? That's the $1 million question.
Some of my next questions, actually. Yeah. I mean, that actually is the next question. Like, rebuilding trust is key, but it's also the hardest thing to do.
Yep.
I know that for me, I started dating again after my relationship ended, and I'm seeing somebody who's a great person right now, but it's difficult to kind of, I'm healed, but it's difficult to kind of trust fully, or to be like, this person isn't going to do something to fuck me over. You know what I mean? Just to allow it to have a completely, like, everybody has baggage, right? Especially like as
Everybody.
time goes on, everybody has baggage, but you need to have that under control.
Yeah.
Because you can't make your past, you're somebody who's in your present, you can't make it their fault.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's like that's like next level work for sure. Um, I remarried. So yes, when I started dating my husband, I thought I had my shit together in terms of like regulated nervous system. I was golden. And then I started dating, and it was like I was back in the middle of everything again. My body was like, what the fuck? Are you serious? We're doing this again. Don't you remember what happened last time?
Exactly.
Heart racing, couldn't eat. Oh my God, what's happening? Is he lying to me? Can I trust him? And at the root of all that really is, we'll talk about some practicality, but it really is, do I trust myself to make those decisions?
Yes.
Do I trust myself? And really just coming home to that over and over again. And that's a huge thing that I do. One of the things that I do when I work with my clients to work on that is, first of all, it's boundaries, right? Boundaries is like, if I'm going to set a boundary for myself, and those are really the most important ones. We have boundaries for other people, but the ones that we have for ourselves, that's how
important.
That's how we prove that we are trustworthy for ourselves, right? Those are the focus. And that's how we start to trust ourselves and other people again. And then one of the work that I do is we look at what I call a relational pattern. So we look at not this most recent relationship, we look at that one, but we go all the way back in your romantic history. And
Lord.
Look at But what we find there is like evidence of other choices we were in toxic relationships. We also see that we picked some really great people as well, right? And so statistically, we see that we're capable of picking a person. And when we go through that history, we identify a pattern, right? A pattern. And again, I believe all of this is rooted in childhood, unprocessed, unhealed trauma, which we all have. And that's why we try to reenact that in a way and to heal that thing that happened to us. And that's where we find ourselves in these relationships. And so that we end up getting hurt again. And so when we can understand what that pattern is, what's the thing that we didn't get when we were kids that we're trying to get from this grown-up relationship? How do we give it to ourselves instead so that we're a more whole person when we enter this relationship? Like when we do that, we can shift how we show up in relationships. We can shift in the kind of person we're attracted to.
Definitely. Yeah. And like when you do that work, I mean, what are some of the steps? I mean, you kind of do like a relationship audit, it sounds like, but it sounds like you also go back to like the childhood and kind of looking at the attachment styles as well.
Absolutely. We talk about attachment styles, and we talk about it sort of blends imago theory, which is right, like we pick a person trying to fulfill a need that we didn't get from our primary caregivers. And then it is like it's from the 12 steps. The 12 steps is called like a moral inventory. And I don't like that word, but I've adapted it, right? When we look at sort of like the history of our relationships, how we showed up, what happened, what were the choices that we made, how did it end, how did it begin? And then we can start to see how we're making common choices and picking sort of patterns of people over a lifetime. And for sure, we look at like primary caregivers, we can look at siblings, we'll look at good friends even that happen, boyfriends, husbands. We look at all of those relationships, because even sometimes at work, because the way we show up in one relationship is how we show up in all of them.
Okay, say more about that.
Like the patterns will play out. Like, I'll have a client, they're talking about, their ex, and like one session, they might be talking about their boss. And I'm like, oh, that sounds familiar. That same sort of like manipulation, bullying behaviors is like, that's one thing it can show up, but also they can be talking about something that happened like with their dad or their mom. And I'll say, we'll zoom out and I'll say, this is exactly what's been happening with your ex. It's just these certain behaviors will play out over and over again.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's because it's comfortable. It's familiar.
Absolutely. Yes,
Definitely.
absolutely.
Huh. Okay, well, so setting boundaries, like you said, it's trusting yourself. That's really the thing. And I think that for me, it took me a bit to realize that like that was what it was. I was like, yeah, like I just don't, I got into dating again and I was like, I just like don't understand a lot about myself. I'm realizing that I don't understand a lot about myself. But setting boundaries for myself was the best thing that I could do so that I could be like, no, I know what's up. I know what's going on. So when you do eventually decide to enter into another relationship, how does that work? How do you walk people through that process? Because you've done the work of feeling that betrayal, of processing that fully. You've done the work of trying to heal from it. You've done the work of trying to understand it.
Right.
But when it comes time to actually move on, sometimes that can be the hardest part. And you don't think that it will be, but sometimes it can be.
Oh, it for sure it's the hardest part.
Yeah.
You think you're all fine, and it's even fine when you start dating and you're like, "Oh, I'm detached, I'm having fun." But as soon as you start to like somebody, like that's where that's where shit gets
Yep.
real.
You're like, Jesus.
You're like, "Oh my god, this is, it really is it's really a struggle to learn to trust someone again." You said so many smart things. It really is like we have to have an incredible sense of self-awareness. That's why we have to have done this work. And, we can only do so much healing on our own. There's a piece that can
Yes.
only happen in a relationship with someone else where we learn to trust somebody else.
That is such a good point.
It's 100%. There's only so far we can go on our own. And it really takes such incredible self-awareness and self-knowledge to do like you were talking about. If you're in a situation, you're dating someone, you find yourself triggered, they've done something or said something that reminds you of something that happened in the past. And to be able to have the wherewithal, and it takes practice and meditation and therapy and all of it, to be able to say in that moment, take a beat, take a breath and say, I'm having a really big reaction right now to what's going on. And I can own that about 10% of it has to do with this present moment and the person in front of me. And 90% of it might have to do with what happened in the past. And so being able to know when that's happening and giving yourself some time to walk away, telling your person, because at this point, this is where you start to have some tough conversations with your person, right? You got to let them know sort of what's going on so that they can hold space for you, so they can learn how to care for you. And then be able to care for yourself and go, you know what, I need to walk away. I'm super triggered right now. I need to take a bath. I need to go for a walk. I need some time. And it can be really hard, when we have these intense moments come up. For sure, it's hard as fuck for me to walk away. I want to fix it.
Yep.
But the best thing is often take a nap, eat a sandwich, or go for a walk, right? Just give yourself some space.
Definitely. Well, how do you suggest that people bring up betrayal with their partner? Do you suggest that they wait a while until, for me, and this is both a gift and a curse, I am such an overshare. I will tell anyone anything.
Yes.
And so I'm very willing to just be like, here it is. And that's not for a lot of people, but surprisingly, a lot of people really like it.
Yeah.
But sometimes it makes me wonder if I'm going about things the wrong way, just being like, yeah, this is what happened to me.
Yeah. No, everybody is different, right? And your stories is yours, and you get to share it in the way that feels good to you. I'm also a chronic oversharer. So when I started, dating my husband, I really wanted to have a lot of intentionality and discernment with telling him my story because it was mine. And I didn't, because there's this thing that I tend to do is I'll over explain so that people will understand. I'm overly confessional, right? Saying, oh, I got to tell everybody what's going on. And I realized that my healing in that process was actually to be like, I don't got to tell anybody anything until I really want to. It is my business, right? So then it becomes sort of this balancing act, like I said, of intentionality and discernment of how much do I need to tell this person and when. And there's varying degrees as you move through the dating process. Like first date, what happened in your previous relationship? There was betrayal. We had different ideas about what monogamy was. You could do some very vague things. But when you realize this is a person you really care about, you want to start to say, and again, we all get to decide when and how we want to share our stories. For me, I was very deliberate and just sort of told him as much as he sort of needed to know to be able to care for me. I could say, hey, I had this really significant traumatic thing happen to me. This is what it looks like. This is what you would be dealing with going forward. You get to sign up and say yes or not, right? So
Exactly.
so they can make a choice to say, you know what? Absolutely 100%. You're the most amazing woman I've ever met in my entire life. I'm totally in because you're worth it. Because like you said, everybody's got baggage. That's the thing you have to remember, because we can go in and think, oh, I'm damaged or broken, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's got damage at this point in our lives, right?
Definitely. Interesting. Okay. So, good to know that there isn't, necessarily a wrong way to just divulge. I'm just like, this happened. It was really shitty.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's see. What kind of situations, and I guess we kind of covered little bits of it. You cover people who are partners of sex addiction. We kind of talked about how like somebody keeping like debt is another form of betrayal. What are some examples of other situations, outside of the partner with sex addiction that you kind of walk people through?
Mostly I work with partners or actually mostly ex-partners of sex addicts or women who've experienced betrayal trauma. Usually they don't experience just one flavor of that, for lack of a better word.
Right.
So, and
lucky them.
Lucky them. Exactly. There's financial, there's emotional, there's, many different ways that they have experienced betrayal and many different ways they've experienced abuse, right, as a result of that.
Definitely. Okay, well, you said mostly ex-partners, but it sounds like there is a subset of people who are in the process of trying to figure out, do I stay or do I go? Is that true?
That is very true. And some statistics, I can't cite them anyway, but I know some statistics I have heard is that actually a higher percentage of partners of sex addicts, so persons who've discovered that their spouse, significant others are sex addicts, there's a higher percentage of those who choose to stay in the relationship than when there's quote unquote just infidelity. And I don't want to minimize that experience in any way. But I think it is because they get this. Oh, I could be very cynical. I'll probably be very okay, just forgive me. I'm like thinking of my coworkers and my colleagues in this field. It's like, for sure, they get this diagnosis that it's sex addiction. And so it's like, oh, there's a reason, there's a disease that they have. And so that means they could possibly get better if they do the work. So they want to hold on to that hope, right?
It's not just that they're a shitty person who made a decision. This is who they are.
Exactly. It's something, right? And something happened to them, right? Sex addiction is about shame. It's, again, I don't know like an exact statistical reference, but a very high percentage of sex addicts have some significant childhood trauma, right? That has happened to them. That they're
interesting.
That they're then unprocessed, unhealed, working out in this sort of catastrophic way that blows up so many other people's lives as well. And not everybody who does that, who has childhood trauma, does that. It comes out in that way, but it is that way. They're experiencing so much shame in that process. So I think, so that's one of the reasons why they think, okay, it's a disease, there's a diagnosis, this is how we can treat it. And they still love their person, right? And they want to stay. But also, I think that it also goes back to what we said a few moments ago about a person trying to leave an abusive relationship, because when there's sex addiction and there is this dual life, there's so much gaslighting that has been going on for years or decades. I have clients who've been married for 10, 20, 30 years when they have their discovery.
Oh, gosh.
And so when you have been gaslit like that for that long of a time, it impacts the way you think, your critical thinking, your ability to see clearly. And so it's hard then to choose to leave that relationship because it's an abusive relationship. You can't see things clearly anymore.
Yeah, because it's been completely made to be a reality.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
and that's even scarier to leave because if it's the only thing that you ever have known. Yeah. I think that's a really difficult facet too that people don't think about as much. I mean, there are some people who are a little less resistant to change, but a lot of humans, change is one of the most terrifying things that that could ever happen.
Yeah.
And so the thought of the unknown or entering the unknown is a lot scarier.
It's very scary. Yeah. And there are so many reasons why we're biologically wired to stay in relationships, right? Our brain is a social organ. It will keep us in a relationship. It will talk us into staying, because it equates leaving the relationship. As like you think about your primitive brain, when we're like in the woods, in the desert, we have to have people, literally have to have people to survive.
Oh, definitely.
Right. Because leaving the village, leaving the community meant death, literal death. And so our old reptilian brain still equates leaving the relationship with that process. So it will talk us into through minimizing, like denial is real. It's a biological thing that happens to us. It keeps us in relationships that are actually way more dangerous for us than leaving.
Yeah. No, I think, that hits on it too. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And the way we change that is by understanding why we're having these reactions, right? Why am I so terrified about leaving? Why am I terrified to start over? It's a scary, it's a big deal. That's a healthy and appropriate reaction to what's happening to you. And there's this funny thing that happens about infidelity that's, in the last decade or whatever, for such a long time, right? I'm quoting, this is from Walk the Line, the movie about Johnny Cash.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right? And June Carter, she gets divorced the first time and she's in this bait shop in some rural town. And this woman walks up to her and she's like, divorce is an abomination. And so, right, for decades, divorce was an abomination. You stayed married no matter what. And there's still so much pressure to do that, especially I have clients who have been really active in a faith community and they get what we call treatment-induced trauma, where they're re-traumatized by mostly well-meaning faith leaders, communities who want them to stay married no matter what. There's that piece of it. And then there's the flip side of it where now for feminists, we can't stay. There's judgment if we stay in the relationship after it's been betrayal. It's like this double-edged sword.
But the beauty of true feminism is that you get to choose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Well, have you ever, in your work, I mean, it sounds like you work with primarily the partners of betrayers, and I mean, knowing your story, that makes complete sense. In that process, though, do you ever communicate with, work with, come into contact with the betrayers in those circumstances?
I do not.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I didn't think so, but I would be, and I wonder if you have any insight on this just based on working with clients, any insight on what's going on in the mind of a betrayer. I imagine it's just a lot of justifications, but
it's a lot of denial. It's a lot of rationalization, justification, minimization, gaslighting. Unless they're in recovery, and I do have clients who have stayed married, their partners have done the work to build empathy, to learn to be trustworthy again. And so we talked about, building trust, and we talked about how we trust ourselves and how we learn to trust someone in a relationship. But really, trust is built when words match actions over time. That's how we build trust, right?
Correct. Yep.
So a person has to earn that. So for the betrayer, what I'm looking for when they're staying is are they showing up? Are they being accountable? Are they being honest? And it's not like a straight line, from bottom to the bottom left to top right.
Of course.
There's going to be some ups and downs, but overall, we want to see this upward trajectory.
Right. Right. Well, how do you help people to make that decision? I mean, ultimately, it's the client's decision, right, on if they go or if they stay. But I imagine that that must be tough too, if you have like a really strong opinion.
Yes.
But you have to kind of express that in a loving way, but also not, you know what I mean? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
No, it makes
how
total
do you
sense. Yeah. That's like the root of every coach, every therapy, every
You're like, I know what you should do, but it's your life.
but realizing I don't actually know what they should do. Right. It's this total like ego gut check. And it is really hard. It's one of the hardest things to listen, to someone tell their story and hear what's going on. And like, I'm pretty sure I know what's going to happen. And then when it does happen, and then sitting with them through that thing that you were afraid, the repeated betrayal, the lying, the whatever, sitting with them through that process, it's one of the most painful things about the process, right? About the work that I do. And helping them learn to, again, set boundaries and trust themselves and not fall into the gaslighting. But you asked me earlier about mostly ex-partners. Because of my podcasts and the things that I've written and said and the way that I sort of show up, it's mostly women, not 100%, mostly women. They find me because they resonate with the fact that I have moved on and I'm remarried and I'm happy.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, that's probably got to be like, it's like, yes, I can do this. She did this and I can do it too.
Absolutely. So most of the people who reach out to me are either they're there already or they're really close and they need some just support to sort of get them all the way.
Right. Right. Well, I imagine that there are a lot of kind of practical things that come along with that decision making of whether to stay, whether to go. And when you do, decide to leave, if you decide to leave, even more practical things that need to be worked out. What do you kind of watch your clients, and what did you at the time kind of grapple with in a lot of those decision making?
Divorce if there's divorce involved, divorce is a messy and sort of painful process. Mm-hmm. And just really trying to boil it down and really learning to care for your nervous system. One of the things that I teach clients, this is very basic to everything, is going slow is your superpower. When you're moving through a breakup or through a divorce process or in day-to-day life, like there's this false narrative that we have to rush and make a decision. And most of the time it's not true. So when we can slow down and listen to our bodies and regulate our nervous systems, then we're able to make better, more thoughtful, more well-informed decisions. So that's sort of like the root of everything when I work with clients. But then just getting really clear on what's most important to you when you're going through this sort of process. And, there are people coaches who specialize in divorce or like the legal process. So obviously you need a fantastic lawyer if that's what you're going through, but getting clear on what's most important to you. Because in this process, nobody gets everything that they want.
No.
So what are your core values? What are the things that are most important to you? And usually it comes down to like kids and money, right? That's the things that we usually have to, we have to split up the most. And so what are things that are most important to you and focus on those?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, when it comes down to money, I imagine that can be messy. I imagine kids can be too, but it feels like there's, I don't know, usually and hopefully, obviously this can't be a blanket statement, but more of an understanding that both parties should be in the children's lives. Whereas I imagine that money, it can get a lot more intense, but I'm not a parent and I don't have a lot of money, so I don't actually know.
Right. It's interesting for sure. Money can be a big piece of it, obviously, but with the parenting, what can be a struggle is, and I've lived this and I have clients I've walk with them through the divorce process, is that sometimes the sex addiction behaviors can be so unsettling and some of them even criminal.
Yes.
However, that doesn't matter in the custody process unless it's like something that's, child pornography or right. But if there's an affair, if there's, even or pornography or lots of the other ways that it shows up, it's not taken into account. Even if this person has been emotionally abusive and lied, to the client and destroyed their lives, they still there's no credence given to that in the court system.
Right. Right. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Messy. Very, very messy. Well, what about when it comes to kids, like talking to your children about, this is kind of a general divorce question, I suppose, but I imagine that when it comes to betrayal and a marriage or a partnership ending because of betrayal, a lot of parents are like, don't want the kids to take sides, want them to still view their parent in a more positive light. But I imagine in these betrayal situations, that gets harder.
It's really hard. It's one of the ways that it can feel really, really unfair, right? To know that this person, and even talk about, my ex and I, we have a son together. We co-parent pretty successfully. I believe he is in good, solid recovery, but does it ever feel unfair? Because our son, he doesn't know the story. He was very young, when my ex and I split. And I have two sons from a previous marriage. And so my ex was their stepdad. Mm-hmm. And they were different ages. And so what you want to do is tell the kid as much as you can that is developmentally appropriate for their age. So when my ex and I split, I had kids, they were, oh my God, I can't even remember in this moment. Let's say they were like 8, 10, and 2. And so the 2-year-old got a very limited amount of information. We got a book about a little bird who used to live in one nest with his mom and dad. And then he moved and he got 2 nests. We just talked about divorce and these sort of big generic terms. And then with the other kids, I tried to give them more information. The 8-year-old got some set of information, and the 10-year-old got a little bit more information. And again, very generic, but because, my ex did have a history of some childhood trauma, that I took that as a teaching moment to talk about. When bad things happen to us when we're little kids, it's important to tell somebody about it. It's important to talk about it with someone else. And so it's really tricky, just like telling a person that you're dating. The same thing is with kids. But the thing about kids is they will make up stories. We think we're protecting them. We're not. They're making up some story that's far worse than anything that really happened.
Yeah, and they could be making it their fault because it's difficult to understand. And if there's one thing that I've learned over the last year from, my quasi-betrayals, it's that it's a lot easier if you make it your fault, because that means that it's in your control.
Absolutely, 100%.
And that if it's not your fault, then that means that you have zero control over the situation. There's no way for it to be remedied. And that's the most terrifying thing of all.
Absolutely. You're 100% right. That's what we do. We want to blame somebody, right? That's also why we get these weird conversations. This is where the phrase you have a bad picker comes from, I think, because other people also want to blame you for what happened to you, so that it can never happen to them. But you're so right.
Yeah, I ran into that a lot where I would talk to my friends about my experience, and I'd just work so hard to try to put it on myself. And it would be like, Rachel, this is not a you problem.
Yeah.
Maybe this part of it is that you took accountability before, but you are trying to take accountability for things that are not yours.
Right.
And then I realized oh shit, it's because if I can take accountability, then that means that it's my fault, and that's easier than admitting that I had no control in the first place.
Absolutely. And
so I can see how kids would do that.
Oh, totally. And then it can happen again, because ultimately that's true, right? It could happen again.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Wow. Well, what about another, asking for a friend moment? What do you do when you talk to people about healing? And healing is such or it should be, if you are eventually, it should become a very centered internal experience, right?
Right.
It might not be in the beginning. There might be a lot of noise, but eventually, as you heal, you should begin to feel very centered, and it should be a very internal process. But a lot of external things can happen at the same time that you are healing. I remember I was in therapy, and my therapist was like, okay, well, next week though, we really should be talking about like some of these other issues. And I was like, I know, but like things keep happening. And he was like, yeah, therapy is like swimming in a hurricane. Like you have to figure out those base issues while things are still happening around you.
Right.
So what do you have to say about not letting the external impact you as you're working on that healing process, or not letting it impact you as much as you can, trying to maintain the focus on that centeredness?
That's definitely a challenge, and, I have like a 6-month coaching program that I would do with women. And I would say, here's what we're going to talk about. Here's the workbook we'll do every month. And your life is going to happen in the middle of it. Like you said at the beginning, I have this different perspective, actually. Like you said at the beginning about how your guests show up for what you need.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing, right? I think that when we start working and we start healing ourselves, the universe gives us opportunities to deal with that. So it's boundary month, in the workbook. Oh my God, look, my mom is coming over every day and driving me crazy, or my boss is being a total dick, right? It's just always opportunities to work on it.
Yeah. And I think that that's the hard part, right? Because you're like, I just want like a blank amount of time so that I can focus on it. But it is funny that the work really is in that balancing act.
Yeah, it is. It's very much like, I remember this old story from a yoga teacher who told me, years ago. It's like you're going to yoga so you can be zen and calm and do your yoga, but then there's like a tree in the middle of the road, and they're like, that's your yoga, right? It's that process of like dealing with the tree in the middle of the road. That's your yoga for the day. That's the healing.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, and it's all right. Like, man, healing is such a beast of a process. Like just, looking back to the different times in my life that I've had to work on healing, it's exhausting. It takes so much effort just to wake up in the morning.
Absolutely. And it's true. And it's okay, like, to take breaks, right? Like, it is sometimes having like your hand on the open flame. Sometimes you get to take it away and take a break and read a fiction book, read a novel, right?
You don't need to read self-help all the time.
Turn off that podcast, right? Or listen to a fun one. It's okay. It's funny, like, we heal trauma, right, as a collective and as an individual in like this similar way, meaning we go through, we're always moving through transitions. And so we go through transitions or seasons of really focusing and healing on the trauma. And then we go through periods where it just needs to go under for a while. And if you look at history, the history of like as a collective dealing with trauma, it's sort of been the same thing, right? We had like, we talked about it like when World War II or World War I, we had shell shock, or we had, men coming home from war, and then it sort of went away for a while. And then we had Vietnam. That's when we learned what PTSD was, what is happening to these men who are coming back. And then it sort of goes away again. And now we're seeing this really big resurgence, right, where everybody and everything seems to be trauma informed. And hallelujah, right, for that. But it's like we all sort of get tired of talking and processing, and that's okay. We get to like relax. It doesn't mean that we're regressing in any way, not necessarily. It doesn't mean we stick our head back in the sand, but it means I get to take a breather and just chill, just exist. Be good enough for right now.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think there's also something too, I've definitely realized in some of my hardest moments in life, there's this weird gratitude that you can have too in those dark moments. Like there's something so beautiful and complex about sadness and about processing your feelings. Like I remember like 10 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer, terminal lung cancer. Yeah. And I was going through a breakup at the same time. And I would go outside and look at the stars every night. And I would just talk to them. It was almost like prayer in a weird way, and I would get overwhelmed with this feeling of like aliveness and gratitude for the fact that it hurt so much because it mattered, right? It's like the Velveteen Rabbit.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something really beautiful about grief. And I wish that, people would embrace that a little bit more.
I think you're so true. I mean, you're so right. And I had a similar moment. I mean, I've had big emotions since I was a little kid, but because societal pressures are not really allowed to have big emotions, we got to push everything down, especially grief. It's messy, it's scary, but you're right. When we can own it, it really is this beautiful, powerful moment. You're like, no, I should feel sad. I should feel this way right now. This belongs to me, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have this grief. And it's so often we don't want to feel it because it is so big and scary and overwhelming. And you're absolutely right. Like allowing yourself slow down and have those feelings, which is
Right.
counterculture these days.
Hopefully less so. I think we're getting
I
somewhere.
think we're getting somewhere. I think so.
But yeah, I think that must be difficult for clients too, who, maybe for years before they found you have repressed or not allowed themselves to feel that grief fully.
Yeah, because it's big and scary. And what also happens is, all grief is connected. I had a professor who talked about grief as being like pearls on a necklace, right? That they're all connected. When you start to pull on one, any grief from the past that we haven't healed will come up as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we can have these really big, reactions to some things. So I cry. True moment. I voted today. Early
Okay.
voting in Texas.
Good for you. Everybody vote.
Everybody vote. And I walked out and I started crying.
I've been there.
I always fucking cry when I vote. I swear to God. But I realized I was crying about voting and everything that's happening, everything that is at stake with this election. I'm going to cry right now if I talk about it very much. But it wasn't just that. It's also like we're selling a house, right? And my kids are growing up. It's all this bigger grief that I'm walking around with. And so this little thing can give us permission to like, okay, I'm going to stand here in the hallway at the municipal courthouse and cry.
Exactly.
Because now I can have the time and space to do that.
Well, it's like I always used to say, like in arguments between couples, I always say like, it's not actually about the dishes.
Oh, right.
Like you're fighting because like your partner isn't doing the dishes, but like it's not actually about the dishes.
It's so true.
And so like, yeah, like it's never just about the dishes.
I love it. I love it. It's so true. I think I did a podcast once a few months ago, but Jeff and I got in a fight about a stick.
Oh my gosh.
But it wasn't anything to do with the stick. Right?
Of course not. It's never about the stick. That's great. That's great. Well, I guess like time has flown. I guess we're wrapping up here, but what $1 million question here. What advice do you have for somebody who has been betrayed and is struggling in whatever way that might be? I know that's a very vague, big picture question, but what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I always tell clients or people is that you're not alone and you're normal. You're a normal girl and or normal person, and you're having a healthy, appropriate reaction to a terrible thing that happened to you. There's nothing wrong with you. Also remind them there's always hope, there's always healing, there's always more love for you.
Definitely. Yeah, all good advice. And as somebody who a year ago literally thought that I was going to die after my breakup, and I lost, many friends. I literally thought that I was going to die. I lost like 20 pounds and I was already little to begin with. Yeah. Listen, like it'll get better. It will.
Get better. Yeah.
It might take time, but it will.
Do the work, get support, get girlfriends, like lean into it, right? And it will get better.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Jenni, thank you so much. Do you want to let people know where they can find you?
Absolutely. So JenniRochelle.com, Jenni with an I. There's all kinds of goodies, blog posts, podcasts, all sorts of courses I've created out there. My true labor of love is the Betrayal Trauma Quiz. You can go to betrayaltraumaquiz.com.
I took that.
Awesome. What'd you get?
I got like healing and ready to rock, whatever that one is.
Comeback Queen.
Yeah, that one. I got Comeback Queen. And I was like, look how far I've come.
Look how you're doing it. And it places you based on like my experience of working with so many women, as well as the way I talked about the Judith Herman stages of recovery. It puts you into one of those avatars and gives you the information that you need for where you are, because it is a healing process. And then it helps you move along that journey.
Definitely. All right. And social media, anything like that?
Yeah. Instagram, the Jenni Rochelle, and also Jenni Rochelle on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, Jenni, thank you so much. I feel like I have learned a ton. It's always fun to pick people's brains. And thank you so much for everything that you do, and for sharing your story, being vulnerable, and helping so many other women who are experiencing similar things.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. You have been listening to Wine, Dine, and 69. I am your host, Rachel Dalton, and let's keep talking.